Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Speak, where myself and Elisa are joined by the amazing Mark. And as per usual, we'll hand over to Mark to do an intro into himself, a little bit about him and his background, but also for him to take us through what he wants to talk about in the Speak seat today. So, Mark, over to you.
Perfect. Really nice to be here. Been looking forward to tonight. So Mark Ormond, I'm managing director of an organisation called Tribe. We are specialists in culture change. So fascinated by all things culture and behaviour and how you shift performance through culture. Unsurprisingly, given the podcast, a lot of what we do is around health, safety, and well-being. And I have been interested in this since my very early days of my career when I was commissioned to build a piece of software to predict accidents on the basis of behavior. So I did some very rudimentary and now embarrassing predictive analytics, having talked to some AI companies recently about how sophisticated you can get with this stuff. So it's kind of some amusing conversations about what I was trying to do 25, 30 years ago. Anyway, that got me interested in this space, and I've been kind of on a mission to try and drive performance through people ever since. So yeah, that's my background, and it's kind of related to the question that I've got today. So when we were talking about this, it was a bit of a thought experiment in my mind. And a number of years ago, I read a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Maybe I pronounced it wrong anyway. Charles something, beginning with a D. Anyway, fascinating book, all sorts of interesting stories in there, lots of stories about safety and habit and behavior. And one particular story has always stuck with me. I'm sure many of the people watching the podcast remember the story. And it's a story of a company called Alcoa, the aluminum corporation of America. And then back in I think it was the 1980s, I forget some of the finer details of the story, but I think it was the 1980s. They were struggling with their revenue, with their profits. They'd gone through quite a difficult period. And so there were, as always, kind of few heads rolled. They were looking for a new CEO. They cast around and they found a guy called Paul O'Neill, who was a bit of an academic. He'd worked in the government sector for a while. I forget why they came to him, probably some kind of connection. But anyway, they were impressed with some of the policy stuff that he'd done in Washington at the time. And they said, look, will you come and be our CEO? And he said, fine, I need a bit of research time before I do that. And then, I'll take the job on. So he went and did some research, looked at lots of different measures and came up with his organizational strategy. And I think it was 1987, he came to the AGM. And everybody, all the investors were sat in the audience eagerly awaiting this guy's fantastic new organizational strategy. Was it going to be acquisitions? Was it going to be diversification? Was it going to be cost cutting, reorganization, all the kind of usual CEO stuff? And he stood up and said, my strategy for Alcoa is to make it the safest corporation in America. And there's a sort of a gas silence in the room, according to those people that were there. And they sort of looked at him and said, yeah, fantastic, but what's the strategy? And he sort of repeated it and said, I don't think you're hearing me. This is going to be the safest corporation in America. That's my organizational strategy. And one of the investors, corporate investors, said he ran to the back of the room, got on the payphones, because of course no mobile phones at the time, and rang 20 of his best clients and just said, get out, get out of this stock. They've appointed some kind of hippie to run the organization. And he said it was one of the worst decisions he'd ever recommended to his clients, because of course 10 years later that increased their value by 20 billion. Again, I'll kind of butcher the figures, but it was a huge increase in performance over the 10-year period. And it's fascinating when you get underneath the story, because of course all the things that they did to improve health and safety were fantastic things in terms of increasing organizational performance. So at the time, for instance, email wasn't regularly used by corporations, but one of the things Paul O'Neill had said was, whenever there's an accident, I want to be told about it immediately. And it was a kind of corporate mandate, so they needed to find a way of communicating really effectively. So they use this newfangled email to communicate accidents really quickly up to Paul O'Neill. And of course, as soon as everybody had access to email, it's a fantastic internal communication for everything else going on in the business, which was so they opened up a great channel of communication, and there's all sorts of stuff like that happened that kind of contributed to the organization performance. And I keep coming back to this story because a lot of the conversations, if not all the conversations I have with senior teams nowadays, is persuading them of the value of investing in health, safety, and well-being. And the vast majority of the time, we talk about the implications of getting it wrong, and the investment being in terms of, stopping accidents happening and the cost of accidents happening, the legal ramifications, the reputational ramifications, if people get burnt out, there's absences, etc., etc. But the investment is all about bad things, stopping bad things happening. And it feels in many respects that we're kind of helping people to sort of take the medicine, or persuading them that they need to do this thing to protect the business so they can get on with the real business of running the business, if that makes sense, rather than seeing it as a strategic opportunity. And I just wonder what it would take to get to the point where we, and I mean the industry, wider industry, I don't really know the audience I'm talking about here, but we get to the point where health, safety, and well-being is seen as a strategic investment. So if you're a CEO kind of sitting there saying, well, how am I going to increase the performance of my organization? It could be through acquisition, it could be through diversification, it could be through all these other things. Actually, the thing that's going to make my organization fly is by investing in health, safety, and well-being, because of course all the things that you need to do to create a fantastic culture of health, safety, and well-being, when you start to even give it a cursory thought, would actually be the same types of things that you want to do to create a fantastic performance in the organization. And actually what's great about that is it's very easy to agree with everybody that health, safety, and well-being is a thing that everybody wants. So it's not a hard thing to get people to up the performance on. And by the way, you do get all the protective benefits at the same time. So it's such a fantastic strategic investment, but I'm not having these conversations with people. It's still framed, all the return on investment discussions is and the conversations I'm having with senior teams is still framed in this protective space. I'm not sure why that's the case, given the evidence we've got. Oh, and by the way, it's not just stories like the Alcoa story. I spent one evening after a couple of beers, because I'm a bit geeky like this, looking for research studies to prove the link between health and safety and organizational performance. And there's actually quite a lot of proven research out there that links the two together, especially in the well-being space more than the health and safety space, which is interesting. But the research is there in the health and safety space, but there's only 15 countries that have done research on this. So the vast majority of the world is ignoring the fact that this could be a fantastic strategic investment, yet there's some research out there. And I don't really understand what the blocker is, other than the history and the influence of industry. And I'm not really sure how we change the conversation so this becomes a viable route to improving your organizational performance. So it's not this is the organizational strategy. Oh, and by the way, you've got to think about some of these things over here, which might derail your strategy if you don't get it right, which is a very different way of thinking. So it's just something I'm mulling over in my mind, and I kind of wanted to just throw it out there, maybe get your perspectives on it. I've got some views myself, obviously, but yeah, I don't know if that resonates with you guys and the conversations you have.
Definitely. Elisa, thoughts?
Like, yeah, what's the fucking answer? We all want this answer. Like this is, yeah, I've had this conversation. We've all had this conversation. We've all had this train of thought. And it's almost the point of, yeah, if you could just walk a Paul O'Neill into every company, then the problem would be solved.
It would, yeah. No,
But one, you
absolutely.
can't, and two, it probably wouldn't work for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah.
Because yes, you've habits and behaviors and all this kind of stuff, and there are some people who will drill it down to everything is behavior. Fine, but like, there's the systems element of it, and I don't know. I definitely think the legacy part, that kind of brand that health and safety has, for want of a better word, has a lot to do with it.
It does.
And even like, so it's not sexy. It's not like, there's definitely, when we talk about the well-being part and kind of how that has probably been taken on board probably a lot more easily. But then that's because fucking yoga and yogurts and all that kind of crack, and it's all like, oh, bring your whole self to work, and people are on the bandwagon. That helped that along a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of it's kind of surface stuff, but there's a lot of deeper stuff going on that is actually making change. Whereas I don't know that we health and safety just doesn't have that kind of.
It doesn't have that sexiness. You're right.
It
And
doesn't.
I almost think the regulatory side of that has been a double-sided sword. I can't get my analogies out because it's late in the evening. But it has been a real problem, because on the one hand, you know, you needed that regulation to kickstart the industry in terms of thinking about that stuff. But on the other hand, it's made it a complete nightmare, because it's become a joke in some circles, and you can see that it's even harder nowadays. I mean, can you imagine a CEO standing up saying they've got health and safety as their core business strategy? It just doesn't feel plausible in this day and age.
But that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't seem plausible, but when he said it, it was radical. And when people say it now, it's lip service. Like, I would believe Paul O'Neill in 1987 when he says it, but if a CEO stands up now and go, I want zero injuries or whatever, I'm like, I don't believe you.
Well, most of that is bollocks nowadays, isn't it? It's just paying lips.
That's the thing.
I mean, when somebody stands up and says it's all about zero harm, or my least favorite cliche, health and safety is our number one priority. It
can't
so
be.
frustrating.
Yeah. We're all just being.
It can't be.
It can't be. But he did make it that way for that period of time. But I think he was a unicorn is the answer, Mark. He was a unicorn.
He was. So how do we change it? Do we think we can ever get there? Is this just a kind of dead end, and we're forever stuck with kind of talking in the margins about this stuff? Or is there something that we could do that suddenly turns this around, so it's seen as a viable strategic option?
I think there is a requirement on the professionals within the profession to change the narrative. Like, we are the ones that walk into those rooms and we speak with a compliance tone, and we throw the rock, which is you'll get prosecuted, and we wave that flag. And so we allow organizations to operate in fear. They create governance air gaps between them and what's really going on. And we design it in the way that we talk about it to feel scary, and like we have to do A, B, and C to get by. If you're a really lovely, amazing, progressive organization, you think past that compliance space and you think, right, what's really great for people? What brings the best out of them? How do we make them most productive? And we start to do great work with people like yourself, Mark, and Tribe, where we're digging into blockers to doing the right thing in the right moment when nobody's looking. Like, what are the blockers to you looking after yourself when the chips are down?
Yeah.
And I think one of the really interesting things, like one of the phrases that I will use with frontline workers, which really, really jars the worker, but also management and leadership, is you are more important than anything you will do here today. Like, you as an individual need to go home more than what you're about to do, the corner you're going to cut, and the danger you're going to put yourself in. And I don't know how we've driven masses of individuals to not have that in the front of their being. Like, I am more important. Me getting home is more important than the clock, the thing that's got to get out the door on time. Like, we are programming, or organizations are creating this pressure, I think, where people forget that it isn't the task that's the most important thing, it is them. And then that does feel hippy dippy, right? It does feel Paul O'Neill and safety is the number one thing. But I suppose the bit that I'm circling to in my brain as I say all that out loud is one of the things that I have started doing within the last 10 years is changing the tone on when I talk about the benefit of safety. I don't just say I'd like to pull these particular stats down by 10%, is I monetize it. I talk about the commercial upside of us being a great organization, doing great safety work and keeping people safe. And that seems to really resonate with boards, organizations, and leaders. Like, we want to do this thing differently. We want to change this process. We want to invest in better kit. We want to give people more labor to do a job and take their time. And then the pressure of the organization's got to tick, but hold on, let me articulate your current level of loss in how we are working now, and how doing the right thing pushes people to the front in terms of their priority, but also it genuinely is a business benefit. And let me frame it for you. So I think it's a responsibility on me to talk in a way that genuinely allows somebody to realize putting people first is the right commercial decision. But we're really the only ones skilled to take all that data, find it, and
frame it. There's a I can't remember the name of the film, but have you seen it? It's the one about the insurance guy after the Twin Towers, you know, the World Trade Center collapse. Have you seen it? I can't remember what it's called, Loss or something.
Right.
And his job was to put a value on human life effectively, because he had to work out the compensation values.
That you want Michael Keaton, is he in that one?
It might be Michael Keaton, yeah. I'd have to go and look it up. But it's a fascinating film because, of course, you're combining the kind of human stories behind it all and then trying to put a value on all of that. And then you've got the insurance and the corporate interest, and it's just so messy. And it's the most extreme emotional example of kind of what we're talking about here. Yeah. And I do think there's a fear for people to get into these conversations, because in some respects, I think what people are connecting in their minds is we're sort of putting a value on human life here, which is really complicated to have a conversation about in a way that's sensitive and mature, but also acknowledges that if you are to move the needle on this stuff, you have to put some kind of value to it, because at the end of the day, it is business, and the only way that you stay in business is actually by making a profit. So I think we kind of shy away from that conversation, because frankly, it's a really hard conversation to have. And so in the back of everybody's minds, you're kind of thinking, well, I believe most people really want to have a fantastic health, safety and wellbeing culture in their organizations. Nobody at whatever level wants to sit there and think, on my watch, people are being hurt. But of course, you're being influenced by all these other things. And so there's that disconnect between what you intend to happen and then the decisions you actually make in an organization. And the pressures of meeting shareholder returns and everything else starts to lead you to make different decisions. So until you frame this in commercial terms, it's very hard for it to be a compelling decision to make for senior leaders, given all the other influences, despite the fact I think they want it. So I think that framing is a really important conversation to have. And I think you're right, Crystal. I think there's maybe an onus on us to be braver in those conversations and find ways of framing it that you're comfortable with and not be embarrassed about it, because that's the kind of reality of it. You're not literally trying to put a value on human life for the sake of it, but there has to be some kind of commercial conversation there, otherwise it doesn't work.
And I think that's that's probably the bit that I've been honing, and maybe particularly over the last 5 years, where when talking in monetary terms, labor terms, or whatever it is that resonates with your organization, is actually that the figure is never about the person. It's like, actually, this is where you are hemorrhaging current investment. And I think the really interesting thing when you take those big bulky reports and you say, I'm not going to talk to you about big bulky reports anymore, I'm not going to give you 50 stats, I'm just going to talk to you about when things really go wrong, like back to the example you gave at the beginning about how do you very quickly tell the right people when something epically goes wrong. And you can start having empathetic discussions, like this massive thing. I do not care about Riddle as an example, and I harp on about this all the time. Do not care how many times we had to fill out a form and send it to the regulator, right? But I do absolutely care when we change somebody's life forever. And actually changing the language around that. So I'm talking to you in a very human way about the humans that work for us for a common purpose. And then you flip it and say, we might all be comfortable now, but actually where we invest in labor, where we invest in kit, where we invest in FM, contractors, all the like, and we tell you how much of that is just leaking because of the harm that is caused. So you're not putting the money on the person or the injury. You're just talking about, actually, you invest very, very heavily already in your organization. Let me tell you where we have invisible leaks, and actually the things that we could do to plug those gaps to bring that resource and that investment back in. And I find that it sort of separates this, you're saying that it's okay to hurt this many people. We either don't have that conversation anymore, or an accident costs that much money. No, I'm just saying in all the accidents that we have, you might lose 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours. You're investing in that. You're trying to run an operation and having to plug those gaps, backfill those gaps because of the current. That's where we are now. And also, very maturely, we have to start saying, we are advisors. We can tell an organization where they're hemorrhaging their current level of investment, but also they get to make a risk decision. They get to say, actually, I accept that risk. That is, I'm okay with that loss of investment actually in that area because we're winning somewhere else. That's a mature risk-based discussion.
It is a mature risk-based discussion, isn't it? And I think I like your point about the advisors thing, because I don't know how many health and safety professionals understand how much insight they have into the actual running of the organization, because they're just framing it through a health and safety lens. So that was one of the other things that Paul O'Neill said, is he said, I can tell you so much about an organization based on their safety performance, because he'd done that research and worked out that was the best predictor of organizational performance, the safety performance. And of course, to us in the industry, that's fairly obvious because of the factors that you've just outlined. And so there's that leaky bucket thing, which is interesting, which I don't think many organizations are very good at really understanding how leaky that bucket is and how much it provides an insight into the organizational performance. And I think there's a more mature conversation to have about that and using data and insight to bring that to life. But there's also the enabling bit. So obviously I'm biased because I spend all my time thinking about culture and behavior, but I look at the upper levels of culture and maturity, and I think what a fantastic place to work there. You know, we define it using the Parker-Hudson model and the 5 different levels, and the level 5, the top level, is we describe as a learning culture. So that's a culture in which people are empowered to innovate, the communication's fantastic, they spend their time recognizing, rewarding, and effectively repeating the great stuff they're doing. And it's kind of like, you know, like the great sports teams. I'm going to name a particular sport because everybody gets a bit partisan about this stuff, but insert your favorite sports team there. And the best.
Yes, it's the Irish rugby team, Mark. Yes, you're right.
Actually, I've just realized I've got something else to do now. You know, they don't learn from failure because they don't have enough failure to learn from. They only learn from successes. So you get that virtuous cycle where they're repeating the fantastic stuff that they do in a health and safety cultural space. That's what we end up teaching organizations to do, is to learn from fantastic stuff, because in a level 5 culture, you don't have the accidents. I mean, we work with some level 5 organizations where they don't have their accidents. I've got one level 5 organization where they don't have any accidents in their sites. They don't have any accidents. They track the accidents from in the journeys of the people from home to site, and they don't have any accidents. They don't have any accidents with their subcontractors. They just don't have any accidents.
I'm touching all of the wood. I'm like, Jesus, stop saying it, Mark.
They just don't have accidents. They just don't have accidents. I mean, and by the way,
until they do,
of course, but their financial performance is also fantastic, and this stuff kind of goes hand in hand. But they have to learn from success, and they have to find ways of repeating the fantastic stuff they're doing. And it's a great place to work, and they've used health safety particularly, and they're now using wellbeing and quality and building that into it as the foundation of their business approach, because they've learned how to learn from success in that space, and they're doing that in other spaces. So there's the kind of leaky bucket bit, but there's the enabling stuff that you get from having a fantastic culture in this space that organization, and I believe lots of other organizations could benefit from using this as a platform, because, as I say, it's an easy thing to agree on. You might disagree about cost reduction and efficiency and some of the things that turn people off, but it's very easy for us to agree that it's quite a nice thing for people not to be hurt. And so let's discuss what kinds of things might we do so that people don't get hurt, and if those things are working well in that space, how can we apply them in other spaces as well?
I tell you what, look, I suppose when we're talking about that, the maturity level of the conversation that we're having and that business leaders are having, if you think about, we'll say, Crystal, the way you framed it there we're at the very start of the conversation, we're talking about the behaviors of the frontline workers, and do they understand that they're more important, all that crack. But then in the next section, you really move to, we're talking to the leaders about how they are enabling, how they are investing. And that's really where, like, that's where safety is created. Whereas conversation, 90% of the time, or if you want to take a fucking triangle or a random percentage of 78% of all accidents are frontline behavior, whatever. Like, that's tripe. Okay. We know that's not true.
Yeah.
So when you take the conversation, you move it to the senior leaders of actually, it's about where you invest. It's how you're developing your tools, your procedures, your systems. It's a systems issue. I don't think that enough people are having that conversation, because I don't think enough safety professionals are even aware of it or confident enough to speak to a board. Like, you would go in and speak to a board and go, this is how you can. It's empowering the organization, because it is about organizational performance. It's not about
Yes.
the performance of the person at the front line.
Completely. Yeah.
So
Completely.
it's how to, yeah, and then and going back to the word you used at the start of, like, who is the audience? I feel like there are, again, that echo chamber, but there's a few of us who are like having these kinds of conversations, but how do you sell something to somebody when we don't know who the audience is? Are we trying to change safety professionals, or are we trying to change the organizations they're working in, or is it both?
Is it your pull the thread, though, in the conversations that we've had? Because actually the change needs to happen across the piece, the profession. Yeah, I mean, there is a reason why lots of people that we know in the safety profession, if there is a safety event on, most of us are like, I'd probably rather not go. And then you'll look for the particular person, right, okay, I'll go because they're speaking or whatever. And it's because actually loads of people in the profession are tactical practitioners.
Yes.
They will fix it. They will say it's frontline behavior, and they will retrain to the paper, retrain to the thing that they already created in isolation without the front line. And then they will pat themselves on the back because they dealt with it and there was a corrective action that was completed and there's an audit trail. It's absolute garbage. The profession is 100% broken, I think. Not in all pockets. But
there's pockets of greatness everywhere.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then I think there is this responsibility. I love that you said, Elisa, about safety is created at the top. That is why it is just culture. It's not safety cultural way. It's just the culture of the organization.
Just a culture. There is, I mean, in many respects, there is no such thing as a separate safety culture. It's just a lens in which you're considering the organizational culture. It's a lens in which you're framing it. It's no separate thing.
Yeah. And I think, Elisa, we were talking a little while ago about politics, and we came to, Elisa used this incredible, reflected later and voice noted me, and we were talking about, I pull a thread here, which is in a completely separate area to the one that Elisa pulls over here, but actually it all needs to change.
All connected.
So actually, and it's all connected. So just pick something. If you're really good at influencing boards, pick the boards, right? Go in and start the change. If you're really good at influencing the safety profession, pick the safety profession, dive in. It actually kind of doesn't matter as long as we're all starting somewhere, because it is all connected. And I think here's the other thing is, I think organizations are starting to cotton on to, I need something different. And I say this from experience in the last 2 places that came, and very, very privileged to be headhunted, but saying, we don't really know what we need. We just know we don't need this anymore. And I don't know what it looks like. And apparently you're pretty good. Can you just come and do that? So that's how open but aware I think organizations are becoming, that the compliance stuff isn't working. But the really tricky discussion is, you can get somebody really great in an organization that knows their shit backwards. Hate swearing, absolutely hate swearing.
Just fucking go with it, it's fine.
But both of you know me full well outside this is terrible. But I think the then infrastructure to do great safety, you can have a great safety leader and they can build a great safety team. If you do not supply the safety infrastructure to learn from failure, learn from success, identify properly a root cause, and then holistically say, where is it touching every other part of the organization, and where can I rip it at its very core from everywhere? And even if these are the tactical things, minor things, if you have a hazard in one location and you have 2,000 locations, stop fixing it in one location. Say, where do I have this this element A, and then strip it everywhere, and then go back to your designs when you create your buildings or locations and take it out of the design. We don't set up the infrastructure to do great, detailed, holistic safety work. We set up infrastructure to tactically deal with problems so that we can write that down and it feels like we're ready to defend.
Yeah. It's
I
like
think,
everything's treated as a one-off departure instead of an absolute systemic issue.
sure.
Yeah.
And I think here is the really interesting thing. I would say I'm pretty blessed with a very amazing team. But even every now and again, when we talk about cause or causation or whatever, and I sit back and I allow the room to just chew on something that's not a root cause at all, when we're talking about it like it is, and I have to put the challenge back in and say, right, dudes, at what point did this, is this an immediate and underlying or a root? Like, what is it, guys? And what are we learning? And are we learning holistically, or are we learning tactically and moving on? And to what even great people, when under pressure with a lot to deliver, will slip into, I fix the thing that I can
We
see.
all do, like,
We all do.
It's fixed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then herein lies the other thing about the infrastructure and the capacity. We put really great leaders, I think, in organizations and then don't give them, thinking is work too, right? The space to sit back and reflect and strategize and just listen to an organization, feel it out and be there. Some people put leaders in organizations and then expect them to be behind an email on back-to-back meetings for 12 hours a day.
Yep.
Not going to reach their full potential, and nor are you from a safety
It's
perspective.
like, you've been here for a whole quarter. Where are the results? Sorry?
Yeah. Why is everything not green? So yeah, I think all of it has to change. I think the senior leadership boards, we need to really understand the commercial benefit of great safety. And I do think the safety profession need to also understand how to have great commercial discussions. And go back. I know you hate it, Elisa, but the core elements of safety, like great investigation.
I don't mind core elements. It's, I don't like the.
I changed it. I said I was going to say basics, but I changed it.
Don't fucking say basics.
The core elements of, but how many safety investigations do you see done by safety professionals that say human error? Like, and it's so disgustingly many.
But yes. Why? Yeah. Well, that's back to what you say about the industry being broken and it being. I mean, we just haven't got that right, as you say. It's right in pockets, but not all over the place. I mean, I was having a conversation about with an organisation the other day, and they've got into this classic situation where there's a frustration by the senior team that they're not moving the performance on, and they're sort of blaming the health and safety function for health and safety not moving on. And of course, guess what? The health and safety function are saying separately, they're blaming senior leaders for not taking accountability for all of this stuff. And senior leaders say, well, we would if we had a health and safety function that's fit for purpose. I just sort of sat them down and said, have you thought about what you actually want to achieve out of all of this?
What's the aim?
And then back to your point, have you then invested in what you want to achieve, i.e., have you got a health and safety function that actually delivers on that aspiration? And then alongside that, have you thought about what you need from leadership to make all of that work? And they were like, oh yeah, it's quite an interesting thought, isn't it?
And they would have that about other departments.
Of course.
Yeah,
and it's the same,
and natural.
And that's what we're saying, because it's just a lens into the way they think about the organization. But you get sorry to cut in, but you get the thinking right in that space, and of course that provides a model for the thinking for the whole organization. It's just such basic stuff, but it happens in every organization because of what you guys just said. You're under pressure, you've got to deliver performance, and you just roll on, don't you, with these challenges without ever giving yourself the space and time to sit back and think, what are we trying to achieve and how are we investing in what we're achieving? And I'm just a firm believer that in this space, and again biased because working in this industry, that it's just such a fantastic place to start, because the outcomes are fantastic in a performance space and great in a people space, and it just gives you that blueprint to move it forward. But here's a situation that's creating some toxicity and conflict because we all just haven't sat back and really thought about what we want to achieve and then properly enabled that. It's a frustration.
think I saw the wind up thing from Elisa, and I was thinking about two things as you were talking there, Mark. One is when we get all, and I don't know why it triggered this thought, but I was thinking we get really wrapped up in the number, and about a really great example of that organization being like, it's the safety department, the leadership being like, yeah, and the safety department saying it's leadership, etc. I think you can sit in two camps, can't you, quite easy. One is you manage the number, like the number tells me whether it's right or wrong, and then I'll just manage the number. But for if you're driving, particularly your safety function, by the number, you absolutely will not have the capacity to lead. So you either want to manage the number and you want to be compliant, or you want to lead. One of them is a much braver, scarier place to go, because you're going to need to really get dirty and understand what the problem is. That was one of my thoughts. And then the other one was about back to one of your points about what do you want to achieve, and how do we create this sort of cohesion between the safety function that feels latched on over here and then what a business want to achieve. And I did a really small presentation. Somebody said to me, you're obsessed with culture, you seem to generate great teams, but why? Like, what is the sort of key? And I said, well, I look at two things whenever I go anywhere. And I look at what professional, not my version of brilliance, but professional brilliance. So what is a brilliant safety? What does it look like? And then also what brilliance is for my organization. What does winning look like? And it's so specific, because every organization will have a different version of winning, whether it's selling a thing, making a thing, whether it's the number that, like, whatever it is. So your mission of your business, understand that to the nth degree. What is winning for your organization? And then you look over the fence and you say, what is winning for safety? And then your job, when you create a strategy, is to bring those to one place. How do you create winning in one area means winning in both? And then you create a strategy around that. And suddenly you're talking to your safety team, you're talking to your frontline, you're talking to your board, and we're all discussing brilliance. And you're doing that with safety completely embedded in that discussion. And I think the bit I love about that is, at no point will you ever go into a team and they'll say Crystal's version of brilliance is X. It is irrelevant, right? Because our profession does incredible things, and our job is to uphold that and do that to the best of our ability and to challenge ourselves and learn. But we serve an organization. Our profession serves an organization. So serve, right? So I just think that's the thing for me is brilliance. If you can pull that into one place under one strategy, and it's brilliant safety equals, feeds directly into what your brilliant organization are trying to achieve, you're on to a winner, and you will have different discussions everywhere.
Yeah, you will. But I think it goes back to what we started this off with, the confidence of the individuals to kind of have that conversation and not sit back into the comfort blanket of the regulation, tactical, whatever stuff that people are focused on. And it's back to how do you change the maturity of the industry, the individuals in that industry, or is there another starting point? Does the pressure come from the organizations themselves to say, actually, we need our health and safety professionals to be having different conversations with us, because somehow we can see the power of getting this right, and at the moment it's delivering us minimum standard compliance and some of the protective stuff, but actually isn't delivering us the fantastic business performance that we know it could unlock. And where does that come from? Where does it start?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I literally just wrote down the two phrases. So when we think about why you should do something, or when you're trying to influence somebody, and it's this confidence piece, right? People's like, where do you even start? If you're coming out of the gate and a board says to me, why do we have to do this? If you've got a proposal and they say why, and you say, because you have to. Can you imagine being a school child and someone, do your own work? Why? Because
I said so.
Already out. But if you say, do your homework, and you'll be able to pick your profession, you'll be able to.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's such a good point, because you're selling the opportunity there rather than the have to bit, the accountability bit, which is a different thing. I'd just love to be talking about another story than the Paul O'Neill story. I feels like Do you know what I mean? It would be lovely to have more of those stories. Why are we talking about a unicorn story from 1987 in
Yeah.
2024? It just blows my mind every time I think about it.
It's a bit sad in itself, isn't it? That that's the story that we have to pull on from what was I, 3? So yeah, phenomenal
Like
stuff.
then it goes back to that part, and we've spoken about it a few times before, of the unicorns, the individual superstars going into businesses, whereas actually we need to, whether it is through professional membership organizations, whether it's through putting out podcasts like this, whether it's through networking, we're each pulling on the threads to up the game of all safety professionals so that like everyone is hitting superstar level like we should be, like that, going into businesses and just being slot right in, being able to talk the talk, being able to hold our own in terms of financial conversations, all that kind of stuff. We are so far. We are so far from that.
That's the
It's
bar we
happening,
need
it's
to set, isn't
moving,
it? Yeah,
and like even things like this conversation, we'll put this out there. That's another contribution to hopefully progressing it. But it's just like, how do we put a rocket under our arses, I suppose, is the thing, because the reports will come out from the HSEs and the ILOs and all of this, and the stats are not getting any better. So in one sense, there's that thing of, we started this conversation of how do we get businesses engaged in this, and how do we sell it to them around? I'm almost coming 180 now. I'm like, hang on, how do we sell it to ourselves? How do we how do we level ourselves up? Because otherwise, how are we going to bring them on the journey?
yeah.
Yeah,
Right, you're right. We've got to sell it to ourselves. We've got to sell the power of what we've got to ourselves
Yeah.
first. Because I feel that there is a confidence for ourselves to walk in there as a strategic equal and say, you know what, you think of it like this, but here, let me give you a different story, and I can do that in full confidence. I understand your organization more than you do because I've got my finger on the reality of what's going on. And let me tell you about the reality of what's going on. I've got the evidence. And what's fantastic is I can help you plug the leaky bucket, but I can also help you transform your performance. You're thinking of me as this individual that's just going to keep you out of jail or the regulation sorted, but I've got so much more power than that. And it's a win-win for us all for all of these different reasons. And the confidence to have that conversation comes from, as you say, how do we sell it to ourselves first, to say we've got this magic thing here that we know could be fantastic, but we're just not making the most of it.
And then it's back to that transform the organization bit and not fix the worker bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And that then
absolutely.
empowers the business. It's within, like it is within the gift of the business. It's like, if you're harming people, you can also not harm people.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I think I don't know, we're getting towards the wrap. As you guys are talking, I tell you what, I'm thinking about how we train our safety professionals, new guys coming in. One of our first ever episodes was on curriculums. Have a listen, guys. It's very shouty. It's so shouty. But it's also how we're training people. You stick somebody through a NEBOSH diploma, and to be fair, I would say the NEBOSH diploma 100% opened all of my doors for me, and I love studying it. But it absolutely drilled me on the law. At no point did it teach me about commercial acumen and about how to demonstrate the benefit of the profession to a board level, or what the benefit of the professional is to an organization. If you get it really right, it's not in any of those curriculums. We're not training people to have these better discussions, which also means we're not training safety professionals to understand their true value, and what they can bring. So maybe that's one of the real big cruxes here is, do the 18-year-old currently starting a master's in occupational health and safety, do they understand the value that they can bring to an organization? Probably not.
No,
right?
I don't think we do. I don't think we do collectively really get it. I don't think it's really embedded. I think there's still this big comfort blanket of what we've been trained to do and not recognizing our true value, as you say. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe that's we sort of hate to leave a question in the room, but there is something in here which is for those listening. It is, are you having those courageous conversations? And if you're not, then what is it that you need to unblock that for you? Is there some mentoring? Is it coaching? Is it somebody on LinkedIn that you could reach out to? For the people owning curriculums, don't shout, Elisa. Maybe there is something about refreshing that perspective. How do we really attach safety brilliance equals business brilliance? And actually that's the core part of our profession while we're doing it. So is there something there and someone that can pick up a baton to say, you know, D up if you're listening, right? Please, let's pick up the phone and have a little think about those curriculums and those syllabuses. But I think it's that stuff is there is so many threads that we can pull on that we add benefit and start to lift this discussion. And we all have an ability to do it in one way or another. So I think do what's within your gift and your power, for sure. Challenge the conversation and realize our value. That is 100% something we need to start doing, is we add incredible value to an organization by doing great work. So that is my closing thought. I'm going to shut my face now. So any closing thoughts from Mark or you, Elisa?
No, I would just echo that. I think it comes down to us recognizing our value. I think there's lots of threads that we could pull on, but you can imagine if you had an army of people out there that suddenly got what they've actually got, actually bring to the organization, striding into these meetings and actually saying, look, you think it's this, but what it really is this, and look at what I can deliver for you. I mean, what a fantastic outcome. Yeah, I'd love that conversation to start changing people to embrace that mantle.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think the kind of salient sentence from me is, for me from the conversation, is like, you can be busy managing the number, and we know how much time and effort goes into managing the numbers, whatever they are, or you can be busy creating change. So like, they're both busy, but one is on a fucking hiding to nothing, and we know that. So
facts.
Oh yeah,
nice salient point. I think also brilliant place to wrap. So Mark, thank you. That was probably one of my most enjoyable chats actually on here, digging into that. So thank you for a wicked topic to dig into, and then come back on anytime.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
You're more than welcome. And then for those listening, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it, and join us in a couple of weeks where we will be speaking about something else. Take care.
see ya.
Thank you.